So welcome to the Take a Breather podcast with Stacy Eric and Eric Almeida. We are certified emotional freedom technique practitioners, and on this podcast, we discuss how EFT can help improve your mental and physical health by bringing real healing to the body and to the mind. We also have different types of practitioners with us on the show to tell us about their methods and modalities and how they can facilitate deep healing. As always, please give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcast and like and subscribe to us on YouTube. It helps the podcast out a ton. And today we would love to introduce Stephen Bryla. He is the owner of Go With The Float in Easthampton, Massachusetts. Welcome, Stephen, to the podcast.
Thank you. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So let's just jump in. And I am very excited for you to talk about your business because it's pretty unusual. You start off with who you are and what it is you do.
Yep. So like Eric said, my name's Stephen Bryla. I am the owner of Go With The Float. I'm a local here of Western Mass, if that isn't put out to your audience already, that we're Western Mass people. And yeah, I opened Go With The Float 2 years ago. And that's what I've been doing for the past 2 years, facilitating floats. We also have an infrared sauna and a massage room.
Nice. So explain to people what floating is, because for those who have no idea, they're going to be like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. So floating is when you come into Go With The Float, we provide a space where you can float. And what that entails is coming into our center, and we'll give you the whole walkthrough. And then you have your own private room with a float tank in it. Also in the float room is a shower, because you shower before and after, and you float in the nude. That's a common question. And inside the float tank, which is about 9 feet long by 4.5, 5 feet wide, it's like a big bathtub with like a big casing over it. It's big enough to stand up in. There are different kinds of float tanks. Some are pods, some are like cabin styles, which is what we have. And in the tank, it's less than a foot of water. It's about 11 inches of water. And in our tanks, we have 1,200 pounds of Epsom salt, or magnesium sulfate. And this makes for a specific gravity that allows you to float. Most people are familiar with the buoyancy of the Dead Sea, and it's kind of like that. And so when you get in the water, you float on your back such that your backside is in the water and your top side is exposed to the air. And there's a light on that in the tank. So when you get in, you can see and get situated. And then when you feel comfortable, you turn the light off, and it's complete darkness and silent. And the idea is like a sensory deprivation, which some people might have heard of it as that. Also referred to in the industry as REST, the acronym, restricted environmental therapy, or restricted environmental stimulus therapy.
Oh, interesting. I've never heard it referred that way before.
Yeah, it's like, it's like the sciencey way. And then, so you float for 60, 75, or 90 minutes. And when your time is up, we'll put on some sound that'll eventually get a little louder. And then we'll put on a red light so that you can see. And then you get out, take another shower, you get changed, and you're on your way.
Very cool. So why would someone go for a float?
Yeah, right. So that's the next question, right? It's so funny. It's like it's a two-part thing. It's like it's the whole awareness of like what we are, and then the whole education of like why you do it. And it's so funny because like it's so novel that it's hard to even explain what it is to people. And then you show them pictures, you show them videos, and then they're like, all right, I think I get what the experience is, but why the heck would I ever want to do that? Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why would I want to lay in a foot of salty water for an hour in complete darkness? So there's people come to float for all different reasons, but there are two main reasons. The number one reason is like is for like the mental side of things, to combat stress, anxiety, right? Those are the number two reasons. Aside from that, with the whole mental aspect, is people who are already maybe on like the calmer side, although we all have varying degrees of stress, right? It's all a bit relative. And but some people just want to get in there and they want to like further their meditation practice. Aside from the whole mental aspect of it, there's the physical. And so some people just want to come in. We get a lot of people that have back pain. We have some athletes who come in who want to recover. The Epsom salts are really good for like inflammation. in muscle recovery, people who are recovering from injuries or surgeries and things like that.
Very cool. Yeah. So, Stacy, have you ever floated? I don't know if I haven't asked you.
I have floated, absolutely, and it's fabulous. And
Agreed.
and I got to admit, the science of the Epsom salts, if you can talk, that's what I find. I know for me, that's what I found remarkable the very first time I floated, was how different I felt. And it didn't feel like it was just a floating experience. It was soaking up the magnesium sulfate into my body. I'm curious if you could speak more to that.
Yeah, so I mean, that's like a topic of conversation at the float conference every year. Believe it or not, there's an annual float conference, which is what got me into this whole rigmarole. When I wanted to start, I was like, I don't know if I don't think I should just open a float center without knowing anything. I'm on the internet, annual float conference. Oh my God. So, the whole idea of well, first of all, most humans are deficient in magnesium, mainly because of the soil depletion. That's a whole other topic. And then so the question is, are we getting it? Like a lot of people are taking it orally now is a thing through like powder or pill form, but are we transdermally through our skin also receiving this magnesium? And apparently the testing is really hard to do because magnesium is like stored in your bones, and so like they're having to do this weird skin testing where they're kind of like shed back layers of your skin to test the amount of magnesium that was absorbed, just like micro layers. They're not like, ripping chunks of skin out of you. I think the best way to do it is, I don't know if they do it through like how they actually, the best way to test magnesium is, but the consensus is that yes, it is in fact being absorbed through your skin. But we don't, like in the float industry in general, it's hard to make any claims, like medical claims. Yes, you're getting magnesium. Yes, it's healing your stress. Yes, it's, it's just kind of mainly for now anecdotal. They are doing a lot of science, or they were. I don't know if COVID changed that, but the main scientist who was researching over at LIBOR, which is the Laureate Institute for Brain Research in Oklahoma, he kind of stopped his studies due to some personal stuff, family stuff. He's actually moving to Hawaii. His name's Dr. Justin Feinstein, and he's like a freaking rock star in the float community because we're like, yeah, there's science on this stuff. You know what I mean? And he was doing research with anxiety and floating and getting profound results, and finding that a lot of the patients that came in who were on, prescription drugs for anxiety were actually getting better results from floating. Now, the stipulation with that is that he points out that when these people who have like extreme cases of anxiety are coming in for this testing, they know what they're getting into. They know there's professionals there. There's professional doctors, professional scientists, professional therapists. Whereas opposed to if you have anxiety and you're going into a public space, a public float center, you don't know who you're going to be encountering, then it's a bit of a catch-22 because that entails the idea of floating actually causing anxiety. So,
Oh goodness.
but yeah, there is science being done. So, but no, I don't have a straight answer on like how much people are actually absorbing from the magnesium.
The doctor dude who has the research about anxiety and magnesium, did he have have you read anything about why the magnesium floating combo would reduce anxiety?
Well, it wasn't directly correlated to the magnesium. Just the floating in general was reducing the anxiety, like the sensory deprivation experience, and it makes sense because really, like, instead of talking about floating with this, like, you can really just call it meditation, right? Because both of you who have floated and people who have floated know that, like, it's almost like a shortcut for like a deep meditative space. Because like I know I've tried to meditate in the past and I still struggle with it. If someone were to tell me to get into go sit in a quiet dark room for an hour and meditate and come out after an hour, I don't know if I'd be able to do that. But with the floating, it just removes all those barriers.
Yeah, no. Makes total sense, because it's just like we're talking to a therapist about how when we're stressed out and going straight from stressed out to meditation isn't really possible for most people. There needs to be some kind of gateway or something you do in between those two things. So having your environment kind of force you into that space makes a lot of sense.
And that's actually what the sauna is nice for, because we have the infrared sauna, like I mentioned, and some people will do the sauna first. So like if they're coming like straight from work, instead of just like getting out of their crazy work day and like hopping right into the sauna, right into the float tank rather, you can do the sauna first, kind of bring your get calm in the sauna and then go into the float tank. Also, both of you have been to our center. It's really calming environment there. So we always invite people to come early and and hang out. And also after your float, we never make anyone leave. We offer water or tea, and you can just kind of like bask in that post float glory.
No, for sure that you definitely need to build in the time post float to come back to reality, because I couldn't imagine going straight from a float tank into my car. Like it would be very jarring to go from like that level of just peace and just calm to then having to be like massively alert, once again, like, being behind the wheel or something like that. But yeah, you do a great, like, I love your space in that way. It's so calming and inviting, just even just the lobby. Like it makes it very easy just to kind of chill and hang out for a bit.
Another big distraction with meditation is just like going back to how I said people come for the physical relaxation. Like some people do have a calm mind and are able to like get into deep spaces, but their body allows them from doing that because, like I mentioned, like they have back pain or they have like hip pain or something. And so when they're sitting, that gravity pulling down on them the whole time, it's hard to focus when, you're in constant pain. But when you're suspended, on top of 11 inches of water floating. And oh, I also forgot to mention the temperature of the water is it's like a skin receptor neutral. So some people have the idea that it's going to be like this warm water, and it's actually more like a tepid. It's not hot and it's not cold. It's like that perfect temperature such that like you lose track of where the water and air starts and stops. So the idea is that you can even lose track of your body. Like sometimes you got to just like wiggle your hands and toes to make sure they're still there.
No.
So losing track of your body, now your mind is able to go where it's got to go.
No, for sure. That happened every time I ever floated. It was that I lost the edges of my body. Like I couldn't, like, I just didn't know where what began and what ended and things like that. And I just remember, because since you are floating and you have such a level of buoyancy, I just remember in the very beginning when I'm getting acclimated, I always kind of giggle a little bit, because as I'm trying to like, settle in, sometimes like you're drifting just enough where you like you touch the edge and you're like, oh, I need to go the other way, and you have to like push off, and just the slightest little gentle like nudge just to put you back into the middle.
Yeah. I tell people that like when you're first getting in and lay back into the water's going to be moving a little bit, so like you can like push your arms out against the sides to help you stay like centered and like be still sooner. I mean, some people like to move around the whole time. Like that's fine too. If like I said, they're in there for the physical, you can do like certain stretches and poses that you wouldn't be able to do on land, and not even in like regular water, unsalinated water. A bit of like a float yoga, if you will. There's really no right or wrong way to float. And so people are like, oh, I was moving some of the time. Is that okay? It's like, yeah, I mean, who's to really say? Although I will say that like going back to the history and the start of floating was the float tank itself was invented by this man, John C. Lilly. And his idea with floating was definitely a mental and consciousness thing. Like he just wanted to see what would happen to the mind when there was no environmental stimulus. And so it's great that nowadays like the float industry is like this burgeoning thing, and it's growing, and it's kind of touted as like this overall like wellness experience, which I mean it is, but like John Lilly definitely was not inventing the float tank so that like basketball players could recover from like their jump shots. Tom Brady is actually kind of made floating pretty well known in this area. And being in New England, because he's had his own personal float tank for quite some time, which again is great. It's getting that whole like athletic crowd into the scene, but that's not that's not the history and the exact use of what floating is.
I love the fact that I love how there's so many different uses for the tanks. I know meditation and like really deep relaxation is one of the main benefits, I guess. I love the fact that you offer and appreciate from a personal perspective that you offer this suggests like packages. You give like 3 at a time. And is anyone listening who's remotely thinking about doing this, I really strongly suggest people do it more than once before they decide whether they like it or not. Because the very first time I went, I was a little freaked out by the whole experience. Like, I mean, I have some claustrophobia issues, and the sensory deprivation thing was definitely something that I couldn't make my mind stop being interested in the fact that I was in a tank floating. You know, I never got to that meditative state at all. It was around, what's going on? This is so interesting. What's going on? And then also, for me at least, the magnesium. I wonder. You know, I haven't talked to a doctor about this. I don't know. I only have my own personal guesses about the magnesium thing, but I was so wired afterwards. Like I had more energy than I felt energized, and it felt like it was very much about the magnesium because in fact, and I think that also because the next 2 times I went, I didn't have that same like, oh my God, I feel like I've just, been just drank 5 coffees. Like my body was deficient in magnesium. And I got a bunch of magnesium that I needed, and it was like, woohoo, said my body. And then after that, like I was topped off, so the next time I went, I didn't have that same really strong reaction, and also it was, I was more used to the experience, and that it was a second and third time when I was able to just let go. And I think I actually fell asleep one of the times I went, which I never expected I would ever do in a sensory deprivation tank.
But yeah, that's a common question too. Like, what happens if I fall asleep? Is that okay? Am I going to drown? The answer is yes, it's okay. The answer is no, you're not going to drown. No one has ever drowned in a float tank. But yeah, also the idea of like floating a couple times, right, Stacy? Because we do offer this this package for 3, where if you buy 2, if you're a first-time floater, you get your 3rd one free. And people are like, well, can I make my mind up after to see if I like it? It's like, well, they're kind of missing the point, because the point is you might not vibe with it your first time because there's so many variables. Like I said, people are anxious. Going back to the claustrophobia, which is actually the #1 deterrent of keeping people away from floating. And I actually just want to speak on that for a second, because a lot of people get the idea of what actually claustrophobia is a little mixed up in their head, because they associate it with being in a small space, which it is, but it really entails not having control in that space. So if you're thinking about, elevators or airplanes and the dreaded MRI machine, if you're feeling that anxiety from being enclosed, it really stems from you cannot get out when you want. You do not have control. And in the float experience, people are like, well, what happens if I don't like it? I say you just get out. You can open the door whenever you want. You can keep the light on your first time, which some people do. You can keep the door cracked your first time, which some people do. But then again, that's not the full float experience. So you try it the second time. Okay, now you close the door and shut the light off. But maybe this time you got salt water in your eye and you got to get out and rinse your eye out, or an earbud fell out. So it's a practice, it's a learning. And then boom, by that 3rd time, you turn the lights off, the earbuds are perfect. You don't get any water in your eyes, and you're just able to have the full float experience. And now people get it.
And I gotta say, like, I was worried about claustrophobia, but I mean, your tanks are huge. Like, it really didn't come up at all. I mean, I loved the fact that I could stand up in it, and it made the whole experience feel much more manageable because I knew it was such a large space.
Yep.
Because like your tanks would be like, the way I've described it to people, it's like it'd be like lying down in an SUV if it had no wheels and no seats. Like it was just a flatbed. Like it's that big. It's crazy. And I remember my first time, I didn't have the claustrophobia concerns. I had trust issues with the salt. And so I wasn't letting my neck rest.
Yeah.
So I was leaning slightly forward, and so my neck wasn't relaxing 100%. But then the second time, it just clicked. And then I was really able to just engage with it. Because then my neck was kind of like, we've done this before. It wasn't a big deal. Let's really let's try it. And like the buoyancy is so severe.
It's
like
crazy buoyancy.
You have to push against the buoyancy if you like when you're getting up and stuff like that. Like there's so much salt. It's
that's one reason I was distracted the first time. I was like, this is so amazing. I'm floating so high in this water. How is this happening? This is the weirdest experience. And I've actually read about the Dead Sea, and I've always been intrigued, and I never expected, I mean, I doubt I'll ever make it to the Dead Sea. So I appreciate the opportunity to float as if I were in to get the experience, because it really is, it's just so interesting. It was all a very interesting experience. So hence being unable to relax the first time.
I feel like I have to go to the Dead Sea and pay homage to the biggest float tank in the world. But Eric, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's something I want to talk on for a second, is the whole neck thing. And when it's someone's first float, I really harp on this, because when I first got into floating, no one really gave me this tip. And it's something I struggled with for actually more than just a float or two, is the whole neck thing, right? So what happens is when you're in water, and if you're floating in regular water, there's like a response from the body to like, kind of pull itself up so that you don't drown, so that your head's not going under. And so we're not used to this extreme buoyant water. So when you lay back, there's that slight pull up from your head, and you may not even realize you're doing it. You think you're relaxed, but you're not. And so it's just even the slightest lift from your head is going to cause tension. And that's what it is. It's tension in the neck. And I remember thinking, like, getting into floating, like, I was having some back problems at that point in my life. I'm like, oh man, there's something wrong with my neck too. There's nothing wrong with my neck. I was just holding it up the whole time. So we do have these little like floaty halo type things, or these like U-shaped pillows that, if you can imagine what you'd put around your neck on like an airplane, and you like rest your head to the side. So those can kind of be some training wheels to help you get going with the neck thing. I'll also tell people you can like put your arms behind your head like this to support your neck and head in the beginning, and then once you feel relaxed, you let it go. And the last tip I give people is to almost even like counterintuitively like push back a little bit, and then your neck will like really free up. And so that is a big part of it as well, because you want to be comfortable in that neck and shoulder region.
And that makes sense too about like the last suggestion you gave of the pushing back, is like you will feel the resistance of the buoyancy against your head, and it may almost give you that sense of comfort of like, oh, like
yes,
this is like it's almost like when you're pushing against a soft pillow, it's like it does give back, it does push back, and so it's like, oh, it's like I can like it gives that like that comfort to the body of like, oh, this isn't what we're normally used to when it comes to water. Like this is different. So no, that makes a lot of sense.
So, I'm curious, like I told you all, I've been listening to your podcast, and you guys are both into tapping now, which I'd be so interested to talk to you later next time you come in a float about. But I'd be interested as what it would be like to do some tapping while you're floating.
Oh, wow. I haven't done that yet.
No, I haven't tried.
Fascinating.
So, it would have been useful for me on my first visit, if I had when I was so distracted and wondering and looking around and fiddling, if I wanted to get myself into the experience more quickly. I think 4 or 5 rounds of tapping, or even tapping on my anxiety, because I definitely had anxiety, even with everything else going on, I still had that. I don't think anxiety it's kind of a strong word. I had like just this is all brand new, and I don't quite know what to expect and how I feel. I don't quite know how I feel about this yet. Kind of anxiety, right?
Yeah.
So tapping on my sense of anxiety, or on my fear of the unknown, or whatever it is, for a few rounds ahead of time, I think would have definitely helped my body settle down into the experience much more quickly.
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, I think that like anxiety is the word. And like I said, like, that's fine. Like, although it helps people with anxiety, the idea of it does cause anxiety. And, it's common that people will come out and they're like, whoa, like I was definitely having some anxiety within the first 5-10 minutes, and I just breathed and it went away. And the reason I don't like coach people through this or like tell them, although there are methods to help get you through that, is because if when they get in there and I say, hey, you're probably going to be a little anxious at first, so this is what you should do, then you're just programming the mind.
Yep.
And so that was another big piece of John Lilly's work, is that the float facilitator, such as myself, and people who are coming in new to the experience, you don't want to program them. And what I've noticed is the more anxious the person, the more questions they have. What's going to happen? What happens if I freak out? How should I breathe? How should I put my body? So on and so forth. And I just say, listen, this is how you get in. This is how you get out. You're safe. You're in complete control of the experience. And once you just get that through their head, they tend to do fine. But just in general, I don't like to talk about methods too much the first couple floats. Once people are like returning floaters and they get a bit of a practice going, then it's kind of fun to share techniques. But if you do it too early on, then you are pretty much programming the person on like what John says, like the infinite amount of possibilities that could happen within the mind.
No, that's very wise, because I would agree with less is more for sure, because like what Stacy was experiencing, even my own experiences for the first couple of times, like you do have that heightened novelty effect, which can be interlaced with anxiety over the experience for sure. And then there is the biochemical influence of the magnesium, and and how that is affecting us and things like that. But the other thing too, going back to your question about the tapping component, I'm really intrigued by trying that now, because I've had moments floating where some mental stuff would just come up naturally, like it can when you're doing a meditation. And then it just being in the space of just kind of letting it process. I've never tried using the tapping method on top of that. I don't know, it'd be really interesting. But I don't know. I'm very intrigued by that. Now I have to try it the next time I float.
Because you weren't really you guys weren't really into tapping when you were doing your floats, right? Or not as practitioners.
We were not. I wasn't a practitioner the last time I floated, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I knew of it, but it didn't occur. I had used it myself, but it didn't occur to me to try it in the tank.
Yeah, I think I was still a client at the time. Yeah, but I don't think I ever would have thought about trying it in a float. But
no, same. But no, I mean, honestly, like it's so often true with holistic treatments that doubling up on modalities just gets you some really powerful results. So, and to me, honestly, you already have the doubling up, because you have the tripling really, because you have the salt, right? Because you have the salt soaking into your system. You've got the actual floating experience and I like to learn more too about like what it does to your body, to like what the floating action does to your like skeleton and stuff. And then getting your brain into the meditative state, all those three things together is pretty fabulous for health.
Also the sauna and the massage too. So
right, you have a whole experience. Oh my goodness. I think I need to spend a day at your space. I want a massage, I want the sauna, and then I want to float.
Yeah. I think there's only been like 2 or 3 people to do all 3 in one day. But it's
lot.
If most people who do the sauna and float, they'll do the sauna first and then float, and then with the massage and float, then they'll usually do the float and then the massage. But I mean, it really doesn't matter. Any combination of that is fine.
That's so
yeah.
funny.
So I just gotta say this out loud. People in my generation will know. There's a movie called Altered States in the 80s.
I've seen it. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah, with William Hurt. Yeah.
Yes. My first experience with sensory deprivation tanks was that wacky, bizarre sci-fi movie where he turned into an ape or something because he floated too much and turned into an ape.
He regressed. Oh my God.
Well, it's unfortunate because before that whole weird monkey part, it's actually a pretty good depiction of like of floating, like unfortunately, like people who still have that movie stuck in their head, like the tank looks like a freaking metal box, like
Like a
really
coffin.
like a coffin. Yeah, those were some of the earlier models. That the movie was loosely based on John Lilly's life, like that opening scene where he's like floating with like the bubble around his head. Though that was like the first quote unquote like float tank, until this man came along, Glenn Perry, who was like, because then John was floating in like pool tides, like literally in the ocean. And Glenn was like, what if we just put salt water in like a box? And then he's like, oh, what a great idea. And obviously there's been many iterations since then. And although that movie did have that weird spin, the industry as a whole is still grateful for it, because it like really did put floating on the map. So
It's sort of,
all
yeah, it's
media
sort
is
of
good
double-edged.
media.
It seems a
Yeah.
little double-edged swordy to me, but because
Yeah.
I think that was a piece of what was the trepidation of going into the experience was, the last thing I knew about float tanks was William Hurt turning into a monkey. So I'm sure it's fine,
Yeah.
but
Well, I think they that got tied into the movie as well, because speaking of a double-edged sword, like John Lilly kind of is that for the float industry right now, because like although like he invented floating and was like far ahead of his time and was like studying consciousness and space and time, he was also doing drugs inside of the tank, specifically ketamine and LSD. And he wasn't just like frivolously like trying to like get high and have a good time. He was he has an autobiography called Center of the Cyclone, where he talks a lot about like what he was trying to accomplish. And so now with these younger generations coming up, and like ketamine therapy becoming more prevalent and people knowing what that is, and obviously LSD having a name since the 60s, and people have this idea of like they want to do this and get in the tanks. And the answer is absolutely not. Public float centers are not we don't have the capacity or the knowledge to host that kind of work yet. I do see that in the future as like psychedelic therapy becomes a thing, and they're getting like trained therapists. But as of right now, it's just it's a hard no. It's in our waivers. As far as like cannabis goes, yeah, I mean, I'm all for that. That's legal. I think you have to know your boundaries with that. If you're new to it, obviously I would say no. If you're an experienced user, then it can definitely be cool to experiment with that. I do say definitely come try sober your first time. Get a good hold on the space, on the experience, on me, and we can have a conversation around it. But I will also say that some of my most deep, profound floats have been just completely sober. The beauty of the tank is it creates this environment where you don't necessarily need any of these substances.
well, I was going to say the sensory deprivation is I mean, so what are drugs for? And we've had the conversation about drugs as well. Drugs are meant to push our body into a space, in our mind into a space it doesn't normally go. Like it's supposed to access different parts of our brain that we don't normally access. And so really that's what the sensory deprivation, it sounds like, is trying to do on its own. Like that is what the sensory deprivation is about, is you cut off your allow more of your access to more of your mind, because you're not being overwhelmed with stimulus, either sight or sound or even touch to it, because as Eric says, you don't even really feel your body at all anymore. So there's no reason to double up with extra drugs when the sensory deprivation is its own type of drug, I guess.
Yeah, I guess the reason would be like when people do drugs, they have this idea of like, it can be like common thought to do drugs and to go on a hike through the woods and look at the trees, or go to a music show or talk with your friends, where actually the action is happening behind the eyelids. And even something as simple as taking one puff of cannabis, people want to go numb out and then watch TV or play a video game, or go do some sort of event, where like in the East, there's idea behind the yogic tradition that they use cannabis and hashish to actually meditate with. And that's still very new to the West. In the East, they don't believe that we're using that plant in the correct way. And not only that, but it gets abused. People using it all day, every day, to just kind of like numb out or have fun, which, recreation's fine. Although I'm not a big fan of the word recreational marijuana. I think they could find something better than that, because, the medicinal side to it too. And I don't know, maybe something in the middle, because it is both, but when you just call it one or the other, it kind of puts this name on it. I think it will all sort out, but I do really have high hopes of what's happening with all this movement right now for the whole decriminalize. There's a Decriminalize Nature Act pushing through the country right now, which I don't know if you two are aware. It just passed in Northampton. So aside from cannabis, like, you can legally have plant matter such as like peyote, or I don't know who's going to be carrying around a jar of ayahuasca, but if you were, that's okay. Like, you can have mushrooms. So the idea is that,
Interesting.
like, they want,
Really?
they want to allow people to self-medicate,
Hmm.
because there is going to be a time where, these substances are used for medicines, just like cannabis, and how they allow people to grow that too. So it's like, okay, great, cannabis is medical, but why do I have to go buy it from you? Why can't I just grow it in my backyard? That's a whole other rabbit hole for me, of like where the cannabis industry is going and how they're growing it and what they're using to grow it and all these chemicals. But I think it will come around to like a grassroots movement, kind of like alcohol. If you look at like Anheuser-Busch and all these big beer companies buying out all this other beer companies. But, us in Western Mass, we know there's all these great breweries. We got some in Easthampton, and it's all local and home brewed. And I think that's what will eventually happen with cannabis and other, mushrooms, if you will. It'll be, big corporate, and then it will funnel back down to the people.
No, that trajectory makes a lot of sense, because you are right. In the cannabis side, the focus on THC content is like the big thing nowadays. It's like you're getting the biggest bang for your buck, which would be the equivalent of saying, of saying like, alcohol proof, and
Mm-hmm.
you're comparing, and so like, yeah, you could drink, near pure alcohol, and yeah, you'd get really fucked up, but you wouldn't enjoy it. Like, good
Mm,
God. And it's the same thing with THC. Like, you could give yourself, 100, I think it's I think 100 plus milligrams in a single
yeah.
go, and you'd be well past the moon. But that
Yeah.
wouldn't be the like. But would it but and then it's like the processing of it and things like that. You're a lot of times you're deviating from the natural plant, so all the other cannabinoids and things like that. Yeah, it'll be interesting. That's the blessing and the curse of it being commercialized, is then it's also being commercialized, just like everything else.
Yeah.
There's going to be the junk food version, and then there's going to be the grass-fed organic version of it too. And right now, the entry card to get into the cannabis world, it's so expensive to get into it, so that it'll take a while before that changes, or before the microbrewery version of the cannabis world starts to come up. Because I think it's like, I think even the application is, I think, a solid 10 grand just to try.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like that eliminates
Um,
most people. So
yeah. But like, full circle, to bring it back to floating, because I know if we get
mhm.
down this rabbit hole, which is fine, you said we would be tangentially speaking,
No, yeah, wherever you want
as
to
I
go.
got my mushroom shirt on here. But so what's great about floating is that people who do practice moderation, or who are sober people who do want to explore these areas without substances, in my opinion, this is perhaps the best environment there is. So that's another great benefit of floating. People who want to explore consciousness with a sober outtake.
No,
You know,
100% agree.
yeah, I've had such an interesting little thing go in my brain while you've been talking about, it's like there's drugs versus medicine, there's healing versus symptom management. And how often it's so interesting to me that like all the things we think of as being drugs, and so many people and experiences people use to numb themselves out specifically, it's you can take the same medication or the same experience, and you can either numb what you're feeling on the inside, or you can explore what you're feeling on the inside, and how amazing it is to think of the paradigm shifting on both your experiences like yours, and substances to be an opportunity to get healing work done, to explore the inner world. And I wonder how much of people's anxieties coming into your float tank is they're alone with their own thoughts.
Yes, that's aside
Yep.
from claustrophobia, that's the number 2 deterrent. It really is. Yeah.
Yeah. And people like not wanting to think about things, or just
Mhm.
or wanting to be distracted from stuff that's like simmering below the surface that they're actually anxious about, and they don't really want to poke at it because it's too scary or or they're afraid of being overwhelmed. And then when you're in a sensory deprivation float tank, it's going to be right there. It's I can see it coming up specifically in that experience, and people having a lot of anxiety about what they're going to do about it.
And so why that's so helpful compared to meditation is because I know personally in meditation, there's been times when I'm sitting and those things do come up and I'm just like, you just get up, you just end it, right? But in the float tank, it's like when that stuff comes up, you're like, okay, I'm feeling anxious. There's some things that coming up I don't like, but you're like, well, I'm here. I carved out time. I paid for this experience. I'm laying naked in water. Like I might as well just like see what happens. Cause that I remember my first float ever, and that's what happened to me. It wasn't necessarily anxiety. It was more of like a boredom type thing, or like, why am I doing this? Like, how come I drove an hour to come do this? Like, what was I thinking? And then I was like, you know what? I paid the money. I'm here. And then like a half an hour later, I like, I what I like to call like disappeared, or like went to the void, and I was like, oh my God, but if I was just sitting on a pillow, I would have just got up. So it's like it does bridge that gap from like meditation to floating to drugs, because yes, drugs are a shortcut to this, like an extreme shortcut to this space, but like meditation is also a shortcut to meditation, and our floating is a shortcut to meditation. And so that's really why I believe in floating, is because I really see the trend of meditation spreading through the West, almost like yoga did. And although people in the East would say, listen, yoga is meditation, we weren't quite, it took us a little while to catch on to that. I believe it's like the hatha yoga movement form of yoga is what people in the West are really attached to. And it's really just a lead up to the Vipassana meditation at the end. And I don't know too much about yoga, but from my understanding is that the yoga movement training is just to allow the body to be limber enough to then sit and do the meditation. And so, but people in the West do not have the patience to do this whole meditation thing. And so that's when floating comes in, because it takes away that physical boundary. It takes away the aches and pains, and it puts you in a space where you just have to deal with your mental.
No, 100%. And especially the lifestyle that we live now in the Western world, especially in the United States, of the perpetual distraction. It's either music or podcasts or YouTube videos or Netflix, or it's always input into the mind, and you never, like, we forget, with all the modern technology and the infinite amount of entertainment we now have access to at our fingertips from our phones primarily, we forget that not that long ago, there's still people alive that like being bored was normal. And then you would have to entertain yourself somehow. Like you would be outside in the woods with just what was there, and then be like, all right, I'm gonna take this stick and pretend it's a sword and fight the tree that's a demon, or whatever it is, and like you used to use your imagination, and now we don't have to anymore. It's unfortunate.
It wasn't even that long ago, dude.
It really wasn't.
I mean, I had 4 television stations in the 70s growing up, and there was only so much to watch on TV after school, and then you're on your own. Cartoons lasted until noon on Saturday, and that was it. So in fact, it wasn't until, God, I would say the late 80s, even before there was so much available for constant, stimulation. Between the cable, everyone has cable, everyone had, the computers were starting to start up. And anyway, yes, it wasn't that long ago that being bored was a pretty typical state to be in childhood.
And I don't think, Stacy, you're old enough for this, but definitely your parents would have been. Like, there was a time back when it was just the 3 or 4 stations that the TV would just stop broadcasting.
Oh yeah,
like they'd be like, "We're done for our day," and then it would go to snow. Yeah,
it went. And there were like lines on the screen, and you just had, it was like 1 a.m. You just had to go to,
You just had to turn off there was
You just
nothing
had to
there.
go- there's nothing
and
there.
then
You
all
had to go
just
to
sat
bed.
there and meditated, right?
Oh yeah.
But that's, and so like if you go back even further, and this taps into some of my antique nonsense I did in the past, like there were times where people would get together and they would sit in a parlor, and each of them would be reading their own book, and they wouldn't be necessarily talking to each other. Like they would just be in each other's presence. And then like sometimes they'd talk about, oh, this was interesting, blah, blah, blah. Like that was very common. Like the great writers like Hemingway and things like that, they would just go out to a cafe and just sit at the cafe and just write or just observe or just be.
And yes, and one thing I love about the float tank, and because massage functions the same way, is there, because I have tons of people who say, because we're trained, right? So, I mean, the younger you are, the more you're trained to assume there's always going to be some entertainment value around you at all times. And in the world, and whether you want to be meditative or whether you want to be stimulated, there just is stimulus around you all the time. And so it's a habit, both of your mind and your body, to be looking for stimulation all the time. And I have clients who often say, you know, I can't meditate, I can't relax, and they need help. They need help retraining their bodies and minds into relaxing. And so one reason I love the float tank is it's a very easy, I mean, it's a very low invasive way to help retrain your nervous system and your mind and body to just learn how to get there again. Because if you're trained to be in high active seeking mode all the time, then you can't do it by yourself. So you need a practitioner like yourself or myself to help guide you back to what's actually a natural state, which is to be that meditative state is actually what we're built to be able to go to, that natural state of meditative presence, calm in the moments. And we're meant to live there most of our day. We're actually supposed to mostly be in the, there's like the alpha wave where you're like in the goal oriented, blah, blah, blah. And then there's a beta, I think I forget what one is supposed to consider next, but anyway, there's the meditative wave.
Theta, which is actually what we're looking for in the float tank. I think there's a float center too called theta wave floats.
Very cool.
Yeah.
But my understanding is humans are meant to be hanging out in theta just naturally for hours in the day. And instead we're normally in alpha. And so it's just going to it might take some time to get us back there, but the float tank is a perfect opportunity to retrain into theta.
Yeah, like sometimes I'll be like outside and like you just see like a toad or like a little insect or like a bird, and they're just sitting there and they're just like, what are they're just meditating right now. They're just chilling. They're just no worry. I mean, yeah, they're looking to see if a hawk is gonna come grab them, but once they feel safe, they're just chilling. And we don't do that because we have a phone in front of our face, We're
worries, or we're concerned about the next thing we should be doing, or we have our busy schedules and our busy lives. And we put so much, and we're trained again to put all our energy into thinking about all these things that should be being productive, right? We have to always be productive. And that's, and untraining all of us out of that. I think it's like the next wave of, it's like we're all, half of what we have the podcast, for me anyway, is helping people retrain, like finding ways to retrain ourselves out of habits that have never served us and are certainly not serving us now.
But what you can trick the people into nowadays is telling them that actually meditating and floating is productive, because it's the idea that, and I'm a hypocrite for this, because like I don't meditate or float enough to help my neurotic brain, because I'm so go with the business, and to float more, you think like, oh well, I get stuff done, but I have trouble focusing. And so if you would just meditate more, you'd have more focus to actually get more done. It's like the idea of sharpening the axe before you chop the wood. Where you're just chopping and you don't want to stop. It's like, actually, man, if you would just stop for a second and sharpen that thing, you could cut a lot more wood a lot faster. And I know I talked about not wanting to program the people, but I do want to just touch upon the idea that, people who are new to floating, they have this expectation that okay, so say Stacy, you know, you're giving someone a massage and they can't relax, you're like, hey, go try floating. They're like, great. They come in, they're like, oh, well, you know, Stacy told me to do this, it's so great, and like I'm just going to go in and finally, thank God, I'm just going to be relaxed, I'm going to basically become enlightened, all my thoughts are going to stop, thank God for this float tank thing. And then people come out and they're like, I don't think this is going to work for me. I'm like, why? What, is everything okay? They're like, well, yeah, I couldn't stop thinking. I'm like, well, welcome to being a human. You know, it takes practice. It's like, although it is a shortcut for meditation, it still takes work. You don't go to the gym and try to lift the heaviest weights. You know, there's a bit of a learning curve here.
No, for sure. And that's a big thing too with when it comes to meditation, like at least the way that I look at meditation, it's like, it's not, I don't see the goal personally. I don't see the goal of meditation to be to clear the mind of thought. I see the goal of meditation to is just to be aware of what I am thinking.
Well,
So
that's because you're educated and you're in the wellness space. We're talking about the masses here.
That's
like
true.
that was a very
that's true.
You know.
But no, it's true, and I've had to explain that to people. Granted, it was explained to me as well. Yeah. Of like, you know, it's not a failure of meditation when your mind keeps having thoughts. It's like, no, that's the fucking point. You're supposed to just what is going on in your head. And then when you get to a point where like all the randomness kind of stops, and all of a sudden you're just kind of like, using your terms, like you go into the void, and you just lose time, and you don't even know where you went, but but you enjoyed it. It was pleasant. It was just kind of just free floating, whatever you want to call it.
Well, it's the brainwave thing that's happening, actually.
Yeah.
Like, so like Stacy said, you're moving from alpha to beta to theta because you're just slowly, because a lot of what's happening in there is your breathing slows down and your mind kind of follows that. And so also in the West, I think I might have explained this to you guys before. I talk about it a lot, of the idea of the hypnagogic state. So when you're awake and you're transitioning to sleep, if awake is, you know, white and sleep is black, that transition, that gray area is called the hypnagogic state. And then on the other end, from sleep, the black to the wake white, that other gray space on the other end is called the hypnopompic state. And it's also similar to the theta. And so like you're in this in between dream state, and there's something about the float tank, the environment of the sensory deprivation, that when you're going back and forth from all these states, some people will come out and be like, wow, that went by fast. I'm like, did you fall asleep? They're like, I don't even know. People don't even know if they were sleeping or not.
No, that's both versions of that have happened to me. Like there have been times where the time goes like this. Yeah. And then all of a sudden the music comes on and it's like, no, I want more. Yeah. And then other times it feels
Get me the hell out of here.
Well, I've had moments where I'm kind of like, I'm kind of done. But I've also had moments where it's like, it's almost like a dream state where I like, or maybe maybe I would fall asleep. I don't know. But like, where like I am somewhere and my perception of time elongates, and I feel like I was in there much longer than I was, but the whole time it's enjoyable. Okay. Like it's just like, it's so hard. It's very hard to just put it.
It's hard to explain.
It's hard to put into words. Right? Yeah. But like the closest to that I could compare it to would be sleep. Like there are certain times like you wake up from a night's sleep, whether in the middle of the night or in the morning, whatever it is, and you feel like you came from somewhere. Like you went somewhere and you liked wherever you was, and then you came back, and like you have this like perception of like, I was there for a while, but then there's no conscious thought of it anymore. It's almost it's just like it's almost like this like an energetic echo. And that sounds weird as fuck, but it's true. Like, and I've had those moments in the tank as well, where it's just like, you go somewhere and like, it's pleasant. It's safe. It's like living in contentment. It's so nice, but it depends if that's the float you were meant to have in that moment.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, I don't want to sell that to people either. But like, if, especially for someone who's new, you're right. You're going to have more of the, the novelty effect, like what happened to both of us. Of like, there are plenty of times where I'm just like bouncing around from wall to wall, gently being, and like giggling to myself, being like, and or feeling my own skin and feeling how like slick and smooth it feels with the high salt content. Like, there's the novelty component of it, but then you go through the thought, like the cognitive blah blah blah. Like, yeah, it's every experience is truly different. It's what you need in that moment. It's either thought, it's either actual sleep, or it's just biological rest. It gives you kind of what you need.
I do want to touch back upon what Stacy was saying, like how she felt after that one time, how she felt really energized. Because a lot of people, we've been talking so much as of now about the actual float experience and what happens to you in there and how you feel while you're floating. And Stacy, I'm sure you can say too, and also with tapping, with massage, people who are new to these experiences, they're really caught up in like, oh, well, how is it going to make me feel when I'm doing this? When a big part of it is actually how you feel after, right? So people who come on and quote unquote can't stop thinking, or we're a little anxious or this or that, they still find themselves feeling really calm after. And a lot of that has to do with just the fact that like they weren't looking at their phone for an hour, they were in the sensory deprivation experience. So, we try to just like make people aware of, how they feel the rest of that day, how they feel that night, how they slept, how they feel the next day, how they feel the next several days.
Well, I realize we've been talking exclusively about what's going on up here and not very much about what's going on in the rest of the body that's being floated. And 'cause I remember you mentioning to me once that, well, a couple of things. One is just just being in that, the physical support of the entire body in that space, that, because, it's, when we talk about, calming the mind, we're actually calming the body is its own entity. It has its own its own perspective and perceptions. And so if I can see where, just if your brain is totally online the entire time, your body is going to be in that, like, the being in the float of, it must do really great stuff to just your spine and your bones and the muscles being supported like that, along with the magnesium. So that it's just like, if your body is upset, you can get, like, if you have something physically wrong with you and your body's anxious about it, you can have you'll feel the emotional anxiety. And so the reverse would be true, that if your body's like, I am so happy right now, that's going to translate into your mind as well.
The mind-body connection.
That's what it is.
Amen.
For sure. Because, like, there are very few situations where us as a human being can be put into a position where where most of our body's muscular systems can disengage. It's incredibly, even the most comfortable bed doesn't compare to what a float can do, because you still have pressure points from a bed. You don't get that in a float. Like, all of your muscular systems can just calm down, and your arms, your legs, your torso, your neck, your shoulders, like all of it can just disengage and just be like, oh. Like, I think we can't talk to people in the children in the womb. That would be the other experience that we've all had, but we can't talk to them. The only other person I would say that would have that kind of experience would be astronauts in weightlessness.
Yeah.
And so, like, but you do, like, going with that mind body connection, that's so rare. And massage does that too, when in those localized components where, like, you're really kind of, you're needing the muscle to kind of get it to disengage. But the floating just lets the whole system just kind of calm the hell down and just be like, hey, like, you don't have to hold yourself up any, like we forget how many muscles are active just sitting in these bloody chairs. Keeping our heads up straight, keeping our backs up straight, and things like that. And we may have much more comfortable beds and much more comfortable couches and chairs than we have ever had before in existence, but it doesn't compare to just being suspended in water, which we are 70% of as it is, just being suspended there in that way. So yeah, in that regard, it is super unique, and it makes so much sense why it's being embraced in such a unique way. Like you were saying in the beginning, Stephen, from people who've had surgery or injuries, and then it's being utilized from not its original intention for people for sports, for performance. Because if you can get the body to relax and recover in such a fast and efficient capacity, then yeah, you could be a much better athlete. But you could also just be a better person who's using their body. Whether being a mother, being a father, being a welder, or just doing whatever, just walking around.
Well, that's a good point too, because there's the idea of like proprioception, and like a lot of people in
I have
the
no idea what that is.
it's like awareness of your being in your body in time and space
Okay.
in layman's terms. I don't know, maybe Stacy, you have a better definition for that.
It's knowing where your body is in space, like the
Okay.
sense you have of your own movement through space and your presence.
Yeah.
Your perception of you within your environment.
Cool.
And a lot of people in the West, in the United States specifically, I think lack in this. Like my friend who's like a little bit of a world traveler, she's trying to travel to a lot of like Latin countries and Spanish speaking countries. And she says how they're just way more fluid and like in their bodies. And a good example, Eric, is how you said, like, when we're just sitting down and we don't even realize everything, our head movements and all the muscles and bones that are working. And floating has helped me with my body awareness, and such that like sometimes when I get in the tank and I'll feel tension in a certain spot, and I have to like kind of manipulate that with my mind to release it. And I'm thinking to myself like, oh, what's wrong with that? And it's like, was I walking around with this all day and just never realized it because I'm doing a million things? I'm on my phone, I'm talking to this person, I'm constantly moving, I'm constantly doing something. Whereas in the tank, you're like, oh wow, you're finally able to like be in your body. And I go to these certain pressure points in between my shoulders a lot, and I'm able to release it. And then it makes me think like, well, what was that even there in the first place? And that's the whole mind body connection. And there's this Stacy, I don't know if you're familiar with the John Sarno book and series about healing back pain, and how it's about,
Is he the back RX guy?
he talks about how like people, like there's some people who get back surgery and these things, or they'll get x-rays and there's nothing wrong. It's just the power of the mind. It's like the other book, The Body Keeps the Score, maybe, where like
Yes.
you hold trauma in your physical being, and it's like you don't need back surgery, you need therapy. And so that's something that the tank can do for you as well. And like I'll also feel like so much better physically out, because I just did this whole mental runaround of going to each part of my body and like releasing tension.
No, that's incredibly accurate. I've heard of instances of people who are like seeing a personal trainer doing physical exercise, trying to lose weight, that kind of stuff. And the act of them losing the weight, causes them to have these emotional breakthroughs, and we learned about this in our own EFT training, of the body holds on to emotion by actually holding on to mass. And so sometimes if someone's having weight issues, that, especially if it's just specific body parts, and yes, there's always the biological component that certain people's body types hold weight in different ways, but at the same time, there is that emotional component of like, if you have an issue with some part of your body, you're going to hold weight in that part of your body. Like, and it could also be just a way your body is translating that emotional weight, and you're literally carrying your trauma with you. And it's so it's so interesting that like it's the fluidity of the mind and the body back and forth all the time of, we carry that around. And going back to what you were saying, Stephen, there's so many examples of people who, like you gave an example of there was nothing structurally wrong, but they're in excruciating pain. And there's also the reverse examples too, of people who have slipped discs and have no pain. And it's one of those kind of things of like, you should be in so much pain. Like, I see this bulging disc and stuff like that, and the person's like, I feel fine. And so like it's both ends of the spectrum of like of the expression of pain. And it's so, you know, that is very specific and unique to the person, and people don't take that into account. Everyone thinks, you know, pain is pain, but it's not. Like you do get those differences and tolerances, differences and what can be handled with injury. It's super fascinating, and I think we're still scratching the surface of all of that.
Oh yeah.
Well, we've been ignoring it for so long. I mean, the older tradition, the Chinese tradition, Chinese medical practices have held true that the emotions and the body were completely intertwined with each other, and that pain, integrative medicine and Chinese medicine is, you know, pain and dysfunction and disease are all tied up to our emotions. And so that, you know, there's always should be healing on two levels, which is another way in which the floating is nice, because it does feel like it's you're soothing the body and the mind at the same time, which is, it's that kind of integrated experience that provides some really deep healing.
And regrettably, once again, the Western world, you know, because of the predominance leaning into the pharmaceutical industry, the goal so much of the time is just masking symptom instead of healing healing the root cause, which ties back into the floating as well, of people being scared to even be alone with their thoughts because they've been running so fast to be crazy productive or running away from what the hell they've been is behind them. And that's something that, you know, Stacy and I work with all the time with our clients, is like getting them to feel things that they don't want to feel. But once they feel it and they're done going through it, they feel great. Like it might suck in the moment, but then
Mhm.
afterwards they feel great. Just like what you were saying before, like you feel that tension and then you bring your attention to that tension in your body. You move around, you relax and you focus, and it's like, was that always there? And then all of a sudden, like it goes away and then it's gone. It's the same thing a lot with what we do where with EFT of like, you know, what is right below the surface. And that's what the tapping does. It lets it come to the surface for us to then process with the client. And then they can just let it go. They can let that emotional tension go and it's gone. And then they can just keep going. And all of a sudden afterwards are like, oh, I feel better. Like, just like what you advise with your clients with the floating, it's like, how did you sleep? How, you know, how was your day? How were you interacting with your spouse or your colleagues or your family? Like, and then they'll be like, oh yeah, you know, I wasn't as angry at this person, or I didn't get you know, this person cut me off, I didn't even notice. And like that stuff starts to melt off because you gave your chance for your mind and your body and honestly your soul to recharge and to just kind of relax. And
Yeah.
we don't do that enough.
Another analogy I use is like, because you're talking about the resistance to people sitting with their own thoughts, is like, honestly, I face that resistance most times I float, just because I'm really kind of go ADD type mind, and so it's hard for me to get into the tank. Just like where some people have a hard time getting to the gym or to exercising, and you know they finally, you know, drag themselves to the gym, or they go for a run or a long walk, and they come back and they're like, oh wow, I'm really glad I did that. And that's how I feel about floating every time. It's like, I gotta get in there, I gotta quiet this damn mind. And then, you know, I get out and I always feel better for it after.
Well, I got to say, I had another ping in my brain from your earlier question about how what the uses would be of combining tapping and floating. Is that, so here's a thought that never occurred to me before, is when we're in that space floating and or doing any, or we're sitting trying to meditate and we talk about, oh, my mind keeps going. Oh yeah, let's ask the question, why is our mind, like, why is my mind going? Why are these specific things coming up in my brain? Why am I worried about my dry cleaning? Why am I worried about picking up the dry cleaning on time? Like what's underneath that fear? And then tapping on it. Like tapping on it's fine if my dry cleaning doesn't get picked up today. It's totally fine. Or, you know, worrying about whatever thing, because it's always the worries that come up, right? So and Eric and I talk a lot about in EFT, where we've mentioned it before too, where, you know, things come up in sessions, like under the layers come up, those are things that the mind wants you to heal. Why wouldn't the top layer of stuff coming up also be things we need to heal? Or they're a reflection of something, maybe a reflection of a principle going on deeper, like, being anxious because we made someone angry in our lives. And that's based on a belief that we can't ever speak our truth or don't want to ever make anyone angry. And that's based on how I was raised. Or, there's all these progressions you can go through about why the things that you're thinking about are there in the first place. But simply, and then tapping on each thing that comes up and see how much more quickly our minds can just clear and we can get to that meditative state, and then also get some real life healing work done, because I can actually tap on my belief that my voice doesn't matter, that what I want doesn't matter, that my self-care doesn't matter, or whatever it is that's coming up. I should be doing all these other things. I should be productive. Those are limiting beliefs. I don't have to be productive to be valuable. I get to take care of myself. I get to be nourished, and tapping on those beliefs. And what a great, so it's actually, I think even meditation, like the first 10 minutes of a meditation, spending on tapping on the stuff that's coming up and helping to release it, and then getting into your meditative state that much more easily, all the while actually maybe resolving some of the stuff that came up for good.
I'm gonna have to learn a little bit more about tapping from y'all.
I'm gonna have to come in and float and tap to try this out.
Yeah.
Awesome. So before we let you go, any last words of wisdom?
I guess I do. And this is crazy because like I said, I've been listening to your podcast, and I was like, oh, I wonder if they're going to ask me that. And I knew what I was going to say. And we had already been talking about this, is that my words of wisdom to everyone out there is, in case you forgot, you are going to die. And so, like, I just want to remind you of that. This is not like a morbid thing. This is something that, so I was talking to you about that book I read. It's called The Immortality Key. And without getting too much into it, it was based upon the idea of the book is around this ancient ritual they would do in Greece, and they dip into a little bit about like Greek philosophy, and how the main idea of their philosophy and the author's idea of philosophy in general should just be like facing your mortality and facing death, and how the Greeks were able to do this, and how it really does change your outlook on life. And so, like, I've just been thinking about death lately. I've been thinking about like other people, specifically myself, and like what that looks like, and almost like kind of looking at it without like religion or my own personal philosophy on what that's like. And again, this is not to be morbid or nihilist or like, well, who cares? We're going to die, so who cares what happens? Just, really think about that. And honestly, like, floating and meditation is a great way to do that.
No, for sure. Absolutely. It's one of the reasons why we had so many episodes on death. Like, the Western world does not want to talk about it. And
yeah,
the Western world has built so many cultural norms around the fact that it doesn't happen, which is absurd.
Mm-hmm.
And there is immense value in acknowledging the fact that we only have so many days on this earth, and that we need to live our lives to our fullest, whatever that is for us individually, because we're not going to get an infinite number of tomorrows. Because, the deathbed confessions of, I regret not doing this, I regret not trying this, I regret not saying this to this person that knows, blah, blah, blah. Like, those are real regrets that don't get resolved once you're at the end of your life, whatever that end date is. And it is so important to mull it over and just assess, like, I am X number of years old. So, like, on myself, like, I'm 35 years old. This is the life I'm living now. I know I will die eventually. I don't know when that's going to be. I'm healthy, knock on wood. But having those moments to reflect and be like, is this the trajectory I want to be on? Is this the life I want to be living? Is there something more I should be doing? Am I missing something? And like having those moments of reflection are important, because otherwise, if life was truly eternal, if you never died, then life would, my perspective, would be kind of pointless, because it would be never ending. It would just, you'd always have, it would never end. It would just keep going and going. So it's like, oh, I could do this today, I could do this tomorrow, I could do it in a century. It doesn't matter. I'll do it eventually if I choose to do it at all. But like living our finite existences, and taking those times, like you said, to touch on that and to remember that, but not getting sucked into the nihilism of that either, there is a lot of value there. And floating, like you said, can certainly be a place to let yourself just mull it over.
Yeah, and thanks to this conversation today, hopefully we can save those people on their deathbeds who their last grasp is, damn, I should have floated. So so now that we've enlightened them with what floating is, you're welcome, world. You can go to your nearest local float. No, you can go to your nearest local float center. You can get your float on, and you won't have to worry about that final death thought before you pass over.
Oh God.
Well, the thing that you provide, and the thing that why we're here and why we ask you to be here and why we ask everyone to be on this show is we've been living in the mental for so long as Westerners, and we are mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual beings. And it's when we access every aspect of what it is to be human, including the spiritual, is that I believe that once we are engaging with ourselves and our full selves, that we are no longer afraid of death, that we remember that we are part of all things. We're part of something larger than ourselves, and that every opportunity we can get while we're here to re-engage with all parts of ourselves, to explore our emotions and our spiritual side, then it's going to be not just a healing experience, but just allow us to be present in our lives in a happier, calmer, and more fulfilling way.
Amen. 100%. So yeah, if you want to come practice dying, head on down and go with the
Yeah,
I would not use that in your advertising. I don't think you'll scare all your customers away.
Such a common question is like, what happens if I die in there? I'm like, geez, I don't know. We'd go out of business.
You'd be quite well preserved while I call the coroner.
It'd be a seamless transition. You won't even know you're dead. We'll just throw your body in the back with all the other bodies. Put some salt over them, right?
God.
For folks listening, we'll have Stephen's contact information in the show notes if you're local to go visit him. And I assume if you have more questions about floating, that you can contact you also. If people want to learn more about floating.
Yeah, please reach out. I'll give you my email address and website information. And honestly, my real words of wisdom are really go float. If you're not a local, and there's floating, like I said, is this burgeoning field. I'm sure there's a float center at least within an hour of your distance. If you're afraid, hopefully we covered a lot of those deterrents, the whole claustrophobia, the whole being alone. Face your fears, be uncomfortable, because that's when the growth comes.
For sure. And one last thing too, and you mentioned this to me before privately, doing the buddy thing is a great way to do floating for the first time, where you and a friend of yours go float separately in separate tanks and separate rooms. I think so. I think you mentioned that was whatever. And that's another way where you can share that new experience with your friend separately, privately, and then talk about it afterwards and be like, this was like, and like it's that same kind of thing too, as a way.
Yeah, it's a good point. Yep.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Stephen. It was an awesome conversation.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. Keep up the good work. I'm so proud of you guys. We're at like 26, 7 episodes now,
Yeah,
keep doing the
26
thing.
release.
26, 27. Yeah, something like
Yeah.
that.
Love it. Love it. Keep going. Persistency. You guys are going to be famous one day, and just don't forget about me. Have me back on when you have millions of viewers.
We'll be happy to, for sure.
Absolutely.
All right.
Until next time. Talk to you later.
All right. See you guys.